This is Tyson Ibel from TysonIbel.com, and this is part 4 of this video tutorial series we're doing with the little rolling robot. And the renders have finished. The previous tutorial discussed setting up render passes, and the renders have finished, so we're going to do some compositing now. So we're in After Effects 6.5. It's an older version, but it's the one I use most often, and we're going to import our footage. If you've used After Effects before to import your footage, you just, or if you haven't used After Effects before to import your footage, just double click in the Untitled Project space here. And we've got 3 passes. We've got our specular, beauty, and our ambient occlusion pass. So we're going to start off by bringing in our beauty pass, which is an RPF sequence. And we're going to make sure that the alpha is being pre-multiplied with black, because we rendered on a black background. We're going to drag this into the new composition button. And so here we have our monitor window showing the frame 0. We're just going to shrink it down so we can fit our timeline in this screen that I'm capturing as well. So here's the timeline. We'll just fit that right in there. Actually, we'll put it on the bottom. Okay, so now that we've got our timeline in here, our window, we can start bringing in the layers. Obviously, we can see that this has an alpha. Now, one thing I did notice after rendering that I didn't notice earlier was that our reflection objects, the boxes we set up, they were set to non-visible, but they're casting shadows still. So the first thing we're going to do before we do anything else is we're going to mask out this little area here. And so we created our mask over that little point that we want to get rid of, and then we're going to invert the mask. So that's the only thing that isn't visible. So now that we've taken care of that little bug there, we're going to turn our RGB back on, RGB values, and we're going to make a new solid because we want a background color. We don't want it to be black, so we're going to create a nice little dark blue background color to complement the oranges and yellows that we see on our ball. Maybe a little bit darker than that, right about there. And we're also going to create a little vignette around our scene, so we sort of center the ball as our focal point. So we'll create a circular mask, elliptical mask around our dark black solid, or our black solid that's on top of everything. And then we're going to invert the mask and feather it. And now we've got a nice little vignette where we have black around the edges with a gradient up to our lightest center of interest. And because our little walking guy stays in the center, that should keep him focused. Another thing that I noticed after previewing the frames, I previewed them before I began this capture, is that the shadow of our robot, as he flies up, he actually gets closer and closer to the light that's up there. The light isn't high enough up, so the shadow gets really large. So what we're also going to do is we're going to mask out that shadow. So we're going to start off by going to a frame before the area where we'll mask it out, and we'll basically create a mask around that area. Move our toolbox up here. And we're going to change the mask blending to subtract, and that basically gets rid of that shadow, but of course we don't want it completely gone, so we're going to do a couple of things. First of all, we're going to feather that mask by about 100 pixels, and then we're going to give it a negative expansion, so that basically we'll give it enough of a negative expansion so that it's not being obscured at all at this frame, and then we'll animate the expansion over time and also the shape. So we'll move a bit forward when it's getting really big. We will increase the shape, and we will also increase the expansion. And you'll be able to see it sort of fading out there. And the idea is to have it basically fade out as he's taking off. So we'll just have our mask finish expanding there, and that should give us a nice fading out. It might be a little bit too abrupt there, so we'll slow it down. Alright, and I guess the moment he leaves the frame we can actually just animate the opacity of the layer as well. So he's out of the frame at frame, what was that, 287, so till the end of the sequence we'll just animate the opacity going down to 0. So that helps us to ease out of that a little bit. Now we could probably even work on tweaking the mask a little bit better than what it's at now. Maybe take off this first key so that it's always as big as it should be. That way that when the helicopter blade goes over here, it's not any darker than when it's over here. So the mask now covers most of the bottom, and we're basically just animating that expansion still. probably set it to right about there. So now it sort of nicely fades out, and we'll just adjust the mask a little bit more so that it circles the whole area. And that should about do it. So now the shadow fades out as he takes off, and that's exactly what we want it to do. So that's looking pretty good. Next thing we can do is import our ambient occlusion pass, the one that's going to give us the nice soft shadows. Bring that in over top of our beauty pass. Set the blending mode to multiply, and now, as we can see, we've got the nice soft shadows going on here. If I turn the layer on and off, we can see we've got soft shadows on the ground, soft shadows amongst the objects on the body of the robot. So that's looking pretty cool already. Much better than it does without the shadows, where there's no shading. It looks like something you might see in like a video game. But now obviously it looks a little bit more polished with the ambient occlusion on there. So the ambient occlusion is looking good. Oops. We will just import the specular pass now. So the specular pass was trying to isolate the little metal objects. Basically, if I keep the blending mode at what it's normally at, we can see here little areas where we're seeing some white lines. That's basically the specular that we've added being highlighted there. So we're going to change the blending mode to the specular pass to add. So that way, we're sort of isolating areas where there's a lot of specular going on. And we could probably even increase the brightness and contrast of this layer a little bit, so that the specular highlights are really nice and bright for us. So we can go to a frame where there's a few of them, and we can see some of them here. When we turn the layer off, they're missing. You turn them on, they look nice and metallic there. So that's looking pretty good. Finally, we want to add some glow, because we've got some bright areas on the ball. So it'll be nice to see a little bit of diffuse glow. So we're going to duplicate our beauty pass layer. We're going to bring it up top. We're going to delete our masks since we don't need them. And now we are going to basically add a brightness contrast filter, isolate the bright areas by increasing the contrast and turning the brightness down. So as you can see, we're sort of isolating the areas that are brightest. And then we are going to blur this layer. And when we blur it, we'll see that we're sort of causing it to glow out, and then we'll change the blending mode to add. Now of course that looks like it's almost, you know, covered in radioactive waste. It's glowing so brightly. Actually, we'll change the layer blending mode to screen instead, and turn the opacity down to about 50. Oh, 50 should be good. That way it's nice and subtle. But maybe even 60 would be fine. It's subtle but still noticeable. It gives us that little bit of extra finesse. So overall, we're looking pretty solid. One thing that it might also be nice to do is adjust the color balance of the beauty pass by adding a color balance filter. This is going to allow us to tweak how colors appear in shadowed areas, how colors appear in highlighted areas, and I like to oftentimes sort of create an arbitrarily different color balance, just to mix things up a little. Not necessarily following a particular color scheme, but instead just going through different settings and seeing what kind of looks good. And by adjusting the color balance, you can oftentimes get effects that you wouldn't see straight out of your renderer, because, you know, without this on, Max is going to, at least 3D Studio Max is going to render, you know, all the shading a similar hue, whereas now we can adjust the hue of things like shadows. You know, make the shadowed areas a little greener, make the highlight areas maybe a little more orange. Just go through and tweak those settings. So we'll turn preserve luminosity on. So now we've got a little hopping, jumping robot that looks fairly good. It's got the soft shadows, reflections, etc., fake reflections. There's a couple last things we want to do. Personally, I'm going to add some motion blur on here because I think it would look a little better with a little bit of motion blur. So I'll be using RealSmart's motion blur plugin. And because we exported our sequence as RPFs with the velocity channel turned on, we can literally just apply the plugin and maybe change the blur amount to 0.3. And now if we go to a frame where there's a lot of motion, we can see that, let's see, we can see that there's motion blur now correctly applied. It's vector motion blur, so it's basically just a smearing effect, but for the most part it works well. We can just see if I turn the layer on and off there, we can see the difference. There's where off and then on, so you can see the blurring in the texture and obviously the geometry. So Finally, the last thing we want to do is sharpen the scene a little, so we're going to add a new adjustment layer and call it sharpen. And then we're going to apply a sharpen filter. We're going to give it a value of about 15, I think, and that'll just sharpen it up nicely, so we'll get nice, basically enhance the detail around the edges and stuff like that. So that's basically it. We've taken 3 passes: beauty, ambient occlusion, specular pass, and a few effects, applied them onto our little robot, and now we've got a little animation here that doesn't look too bad. It's got the nice vignette, background, a little bit of glow. It's looking pretty solid. One other thing that is up to anybody's discretion, I guess, is adjusting things like the overall hue of the robot here by adding a hue saturation filter. Maybe if we don't like yellow, we can change it to orange or something like that. That could look nice. Maybe a little bit more orange. Yellow was a little bit hard on the eyes there, so maybe changing it to sort of this hue is a little bit easier to a little bit easier on the eyes there. And plus, orange and blue are complementary colors, so that looks a little better. Maybe brighten up the background a little bit. And as you can see, because we rendered everything out with alphas, our shadows are casting nicely. The ambient occlusion shading combined with the just regular shadow map is looking nice, because now we have the darker areas around the areas that are closest to the ground, and then lighter areas everywhere else. So that's looking fairly good, and I think we're basically about to render. So I will render this out and post the final animation on the tutorial page where these tutorials can be found. So thanks for watching. This is part 5, or I guess part 4, can't even remember now, where we discuss very basic compositing.